What if the very first spark of faith did not begin with a god, a symbol, or a ritual, but with a raw question echoing inside a mind that barely understood itself? Imagine an ancient human, millions of years ago, staring into the endless night sky and wondering why the world felt bigger than what the senses could reach. That moment, silent and unrecorded, may have been the birthplace of something we now call spirituality. But why would a creature still fighting for survival pause long enough to question its own existence? What force inside the human mind pushed it toward meaning long before any religion shaped those thoughts? Anthropologists argue that the earliest humans had cognitive limitations, yet they also possessed a growing curiosity that no other species developed. This curiosity, paired with fear and wonder, may have opened the door to the first belief. Picture the trembling sound of thunder, the shimmering glow of fire, or the mysterious movement of shadows in a cave. For beings who lacked scientific explanations, these experiences were not just natural events. They were signals, patterns, possible intentions from something unseen. And once the human brain started searching for meaning behind the unknown, the first seed of faith may have quietly emerged. This early spiritual intuition was not organized, structured, or shared through elaborate myths. It was a personal tension between the visible and the invisible, between survival and interpretation. The more humans observed the world, the more they sensed that reality might hold layers beyond what their eyes could capture. That tension became a doorway, not a conclusion, but a beginning. A subtle, powerful shift that transformed simple awareness into something deeper, something that would eventually reshape all societies. Before we continue exploring how this transformation unfolded across the ages, tell me something. Has anything in your life ever made you feel that there is more happening beneath the surface than what you can explain? If this idea resonates with you, share your experience in the comments. It helps us understand how this topic connects with you. And while you are here, remember to like the video and check if you are already subscribed, because the journey we are about to explore grows richer with every step. Now, let us move forward as this ancient spark begins to interact with fear, nature, and the expanding human mind. As that first spark of spiritual awareness began to form, early humans found themselves surrounded by forces they could neither control nor predict. Darkness was not just an absence of light. It was a living threat filled with sounds, movements, and shapes that triggered ancient instincts. Every night became a battlefield between what they could understand and what they feared. And in that fear, something unexpected began to take shape. The unknown demanded interpretation. It pressed the human mind to search for hidden intentions behind every rustle of leaves, every sudden wind, every streak of lightning that tore across the sky. These natural events were overwhelming not only because they were dangerous, but because they appeared purposeful to a brain evolving to detect patterns everywhere. Fear was never just fear. It was a survival tool, and survival depended on anticipating threats. But when humans started attributing intention to forces they could not see, fear slowly turned into belief. A violent storm was not simply weather, it was a sign. A predator emerging from the shadows was not just a creature, it was a reminder that reality extended far beyond the visible. In moments like these, early humans began connecting cause and meaning, instinct and imagination. This fusion created a mental space where spirituality could grow long before rituals or doctrines existed. Night after night, the world imposed its presence through sound and movement. Thunder rolled like a distant voice. Fire cracked as if responding to human need, and the shifting darkness seemed to hold more than emptiness. Without language sophisticated enough to explain these experiences, early humans relied on emotion and intuition. Their fear, confusion, and wonder shaped early interpretations of the universe, interpretations that laid the foundation for belief systems that would appear millions of years later. The natural world did not just surround them, it demanded to be understood, and in that demand, it awakened the human capacity to sense meaning where none was visible. As this tension between fear and imagination deepened, another transformation began to unfold. These humans, still struggling for daily survival, started developing new mental abilities that would change the way they perceived their environment and themselves. And it is precisely in this evolving cognitive landscape that the next step in the birth of belief begins to take form, reaching beyond instinct into a selective, symbolic way of thinking that signaled a profound shift in human consciousness. As fear and curiosity continued shaping early interpretations of the world, something even more significant was happening inside the human mind. Over countless generations, the brain was developing new cognitive abilities that allowed our ancestors to imagine what they could not see. This shift did not happen suddenly. It emerged slowly, through trial, error, and adaptation. Yet its impact was enormous. For the first time in history, humans were not limited to reacting to the physical world. They could project ideas beyond it. They could visualize possibilities, anticipate outcomes, and attribute meaning to events that had no clear explanation. This capacity for abstract thought became a turning point in the birth of belief. As neural networks grew more complex, early humans began forming mental models of reality. They could remember the past in greater detail, imagine the future with more precision, and consider scenarios that had never happened. These mental simulations made survival easier, but they also opened an unexpected doorway. If the mind could imagine predators hiding in the dark, it could also imagine invisible forces shaping the world. If it could interpret patterns in nature, it could also interpret intentions behind those patterns. Slowly, the boundary between instinct and imagination blurred, allowing space for spiritual narratives to arise. This new cognitive flexibility also amplified the ability to ask questions. Why does the sun disappear? Where does life come from? What remains after death? These questions were not merely intellectual. They emerged from emotional uncertainty, from the need to understand suffering, loss, and joy. The mind that could imagine a hidden predator could also imagine a hidden protector or a hidden force governing life. With each generation, humans became better at constructing symbolic explanations that went beyond direct experience. This evolution of thought reshaped interactions with the environment. A cave was no longer a shelter, it was a threshold. A river was not just water, it was a source of life, perhaps even a living entity. Animals, storms, fire, and celestial bodies gained new layers of meaning. Early humans were not yet creating myths, but they were forming the mental tools that would one day make myths possible. The mind was preparing to connect emotion, memory, and imagination into coherent stories that explained the world in ways logic alone could not. And as these cognitive abilities expanded, something deeper began to unfold. Humans started expressing their thoughts through early forms of symbolism, movements, and gestures that hinted at a growing spiritual consciousness. These expressions would soon evolve into the first ancestral rituals, marking another leap in the long journey toward organized belief. As the human mind grew more capable of imagination and symbolic thinking, these early mental shifts began, expressing themselves through action. Before spoken language was sophisticated enough to shape complex myths, gestures became the first form of spiritual communication. A simple movement, a rearranged stone, a marked surface on a cave wall, or a shared moment around a fire could hold meanings far beyond their physical purpose. These early humans were not performing rituals in the religious sense we recognize today, but they were experimenting with behaviors that hinted at a deeper layer of intention. Such gestures were more than habits. They were attempts to interact with forces they believed were present yet unseen. Archaeologists studying ancient sites often find patterns in how objects were placed, how bodies were positioned, or how pigments were applied inside caves. These patterns suggest that early humans were not acting randomly. Their movements carried a symbolic weight that spoke to their growing spiritual consciousness. These ancestors may have believed that a gesture could influence their world, protect their group, or communicate gratitude or fear. The structure of these actions reveals that humans were beginning to understand ritual as a bridge between the visible environment and an invisible dimension that existed only in the mind. Fire played a remarkable role in this transformation. Gathering around flames at night created the first communal spaces where emotion, imagination, and shared experience fused into something meaningful. The flickering light inspired reflective silence, collective storytelling, and synchronized behavior. Even if these early gatherings lacked formal structure, they helped shape the earliest sense of spiritual community. The act of coming together repeatedly forged a connection between humans and the mysteries surrounding them, reinforcing the belief that certain behaviors could influence outcomes or maintain harmony. These emerging rituals were early expressions of a symbolic world still taking shape. They represent the transition from instinctive reactions to intentional acts infused with imagined significance. Every repeated gesture strengthened the idea that humans could respond to the unknown through more than fear. They were learning to shape meaning through action, opening the door to practices that would become central to spiritual life for millennia. Before we go further, I would like to know something. When you think about these ancient gestures, do they remind you of any symbolic habit or ritual you see in modern life? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective helps give depth to this exploration and connects our discussion to your own understanding of human behavior. As early humans refined their symbolic gestures, another experience emerged that carried a profound emotional weight and pushed spiritual thought to a deeper level: the confrontation with death. Unlike other animals, humans began reacting to death with something beyond instinct. The loss of a member of the group triggered confusion, sorrow, and a need for answers that the physical world alone could not provide. Death forced them to question what remained when life stopped, and this uncertainty opened a powerful space for early spiritual interpretation. The stillness of a lifeless body, combined with the memory of its former vitality, created a tension the mind struggled to resolve. That tension became fertile ground for belief. Archaeological records show that even before formal burial rituals appeared, humans demonstrated a unique awareness of death. The way bodies were placed, the objects left nearby, or the pigments applied around remains suggest that the living were trying to create continuity where none visibly existed. These gestures indicate that humans were beginning to imagine that something persisted beyond physical decay. This idea alone marked a revolutionary moment in cognitive evolution. The concept of an afterlife, even in its most primitive form, strengthened the belief that the invisible had as much importance as the visible. Death also shaped social structures. When a group member died, the community experienced vulnerability. This vulnerability created emotional bonds and encouraged collective interpretation. The group needed to understand loss in a way that preserved stability and hope. Their shared narratives, although simple, offered comfort and purpose. These narratives helped individuals process grief, reinforcing the idea that forces beyond ordinary perception influenced human existence. In facing mortality, early humans were not just reacting emotionally, they were developing a framework for understanding life itself. The presence of death also deepened the symbolic meaning of natural elements. The earth that covered a body, the fire that protected the living, the night that seemed to swallow everything, all gained new significance. Each element became a reference point in the attempt to make sense of loss. Over generations, this evolving connection between emotion and environment shaped a more defined spiritual awareness. Humans began to treat specific places as sacred, not because of their physical characteristics, but because those places became associated with memory, transformation, and the boundary between life and the unknown. As humans continued to search for meaning in the face of mortality, something else began to rise within their social interactions. This deeper reflection on loss naturally pushed communities to strengthen their bonds, paving the way for more complex forms of cooperation that would profoundly influence how collective beliefs emerged and spread. As reflections on death expanded emotional depth among early humans, something equally transformative was unfolding in their daily interactions. Cooperation was no longer a simple matter of necessity. It became a structured force that shaped the inner world of belief. When groups united to hunt, gather, protect children, or defend territory, they developed patterns of trust, reciprocity, and shared meaning. These social bonds were not merely practical. They created a psychological environment where collective interpretations could flourish. A belief held by one individual could spread through the group, gaining strength simply because it was shared. In this way, cooperation acted as a catalyst for early spirituality, reinforcing ideas that went beyond personal experience. The capacity to collaborate required humans to anticipate the intentions of others. This mental ability, known as theory of mind, allowed them to imagine thoughts, feelings, and motivations that were not directly observable. Once this skill developed, it naturally extended beyond human relationships. If a group member could have unseen intentions, perhaps the wind, the river, or the storm could as well. Social cognition became spiritual cognition. The same mental tools that helped humans predict the actions of their companions now helped them interpret the world around them as something animated, purposeful, and interconnected. Cooperation also enhanced storytelling. As groups gathered around fires or rested in shelters, shared narratives became a way to reinforce unity. These stories did not follow structured mythological patterns yet, but they carried emotional weight, shaped memories, and transmitted ideas across generations. A frightening event, a successful hunt, or the loss of a member could be retold with subtle symbolic additions, gradually transforming real events into shared beliefs. Over time, these repeated stories helped stabilize early forms of spiritual thought, connecting individuals to something larger than themselves. Group cohesion further influenced early rituals. Actions performed together had a psychological impact far greater than those performed alone. When several individuals repeated a gesture, chanted a pattern, or aligned their movements, the experience created a sense of transcendence that strengthened spiritual interpretations. Humans began associating unity with meaning, harmony with purpose, and collective action with influence over the unseen. These moments forged an emotional foundation that made early spirituality not only possible, but inevitable. As cooperation deepened, groups became more capable of preserving, refining, and transmitting ideas. This allowed spiritual concepts to survive beyond the individual mind, becoming part of a collective identity that persisted through generations. And with this evolving social structure, the stage was set for something remarkable. The first material evidence of spirituality, preserved in the archaeological record, revealing how beliefs slowly took form long before organized religion existed. As cooperation strengthened the transmission of early spiritual ideas, the physical world slowly began to record traces of this inner transformation. Long before organized religions emerged, early humans left behind material, evidence that reveals how deeply spirituality had already taken root in their minds. These traces were not accidental. They expose a deliberate intention to express meaning, to preserve memory, and to communicate with something beyond ordinary perception. Archaeologists often uncover burial sites where bodies were carefully positioned, accompanied by tools, pigments, or ornaments. Such findings suggest that these early humans believed the individual continued in some form after death, and that the living held a responsibility toward that unseen continuation. In caves across different regions, ancient markings appear in patterns that cannot be explained by simple decoration. Even the earliest pigments, applied with rough techniques, reveal a symbolic purpose. These marks may represent attempts to understand natural forces, to honor animals vital to survival, or to communicate with a realm that existed only in the imagination. The use of red ochre, for example, appears repeatedly in ancient sites, hinting at a connection between color, life, and the spiritual. It is unlikely that these actions were random. They show intention, repetition, and a belief that meaning could be carried through matter itself. Animal bones arranged in unusual formations, carved stones placed in specific orientations, and early tools buried with individuals all point to a mindset that was already forming complex interpretations of existence. These objects served as anchors for ideas the mind could not yet articulate through structured language. They allowed the invisible to become tangible, even if only symbolically. Through them, early humans projected their fears, hopes, and interpretations onto the material world, leaving behind silent testimonies of belief. These archaeological clues also demonstrate a growing capacity for long-term thinking. To place an object beside a body or paint a complex pattern on a cave wall required imagining a future observer, or perhaps an unseen presence, capable of recognizing and responding to the gesture. This alone reveals a monumental cognitive shift. Humans were no longer acting solely for immediate survival. They were participating in a continuity that extended across time, linking generations in a shared spiritual framework. As we interpret these ancient traces today, we are not merely uncovering artifacts. We are observing the earliest attempts of humanity to reach beyond the limits of perception, to communicate with mysteries they sensed but could not fully grasp. These silent remnants show the mind's first dialogue with the unknown, shaping the foundations of belief systems that would evolve over millions of years. Before we continue, I would like to hear your perspective. When you think about these ancient signs of spirituality, what do they suggest to you about the early human search for meaning? Leave a comment sharing a word or a thought that comes to mind. Your interpretation adds depth to this journey, as early symbolic expressions left their mark on caves, tools, and burial sites. The environment itself continued shaping the spiritual imagination of prehistoric humans. Landscapes were not neutral spaces. They were living forces that influenced perception, emotion, and belief. Vast plains, dense forests, echoing caverns, towering cliffs, and violent storms all carried meanings that went far beyond their physical qualities. Each environment imposed challenges and mysteries that the human mind felt compelled to interpret. When survival depended on reading every clue in nature, it became natural to perceive intention in the world around them. A shifting wind could suggest guidance, a sudden storm could feel like a warning, and the silence of a cave could evoke the presence of something greater than human understanding. Caves in particular became powerful spiritual theaters. Their darkness, depth, and acoustics created an atmosphere where the boundary between reality and imagination felt permeable. Entering a cave required bravery, and the sensory isolation it imposed heightened awareness. In that enclosed space, early humans experienced echoes, shadows, and temperature changes that seemed animated by unseen forces. These sensations likely intensified their belief that the world contained hidden layers accessible only through specific places or conditions. For some groups, caves may have represented portals to the spiritual realm, sanctuaries where contact with mystery felt more immediate and visceral. Open landscapes also played a role. Watching the sun rise across an empty horizon, observing the migration of animals, or witnessing the violent contrast of lightning against the sky shaped early interpretations of cosmic order. Patterns began to emerge in their perception. The cycles of day and night, the phases of the moon, the movement of celestial bodies, and the change of seasons created a rhythm that early humans felt in their bodies long before they could explain it. This rhythm suggested intentional design. The predictability of certain natural patterns contrasted with the unpredictability of others, deepening the belief that unseen forces govern the world. Water sources, too, carried spiritual resonance. Rivers and springs provided nourishment, mobility, and life, making them natural focal points for early interpretations of creation and renewal. The sound of running water, the reflective surface of a still pool, and the danger posed by floods contributed to a growing sense that water embodied both benevolence and power. Mountains, with their imposing scale, may have suggested elevation toward another realm. Their peaks reached above the ordinary world, perhaps symbolizing closeness to forces that shaped existence. As prehistoric humans navigated these environments, they accumulated emotional impressions that shaped early narratives. Places where fear, awe, or survival challenges repeated themselves became symbolic landmarks. Over generations, these locations were woven into the spiritual fabric of communities, serving as natural anchors for meaning. The landscape was no longer just a backdrop, it became an active participant in the emergence of belief, shaping how humans interpreted themselves and the world around them. With the environment influencing imagination so deeply, early humans soon began transforming their responses into more stable symbolic systems, strengthening the bridge between instinctive perception and structured spiritual interpretation. As landscapes continued shaping emotional and perceptual experiences, early humans began refining the inner mechanisms that allowed them to move from instinctive reactions to symbolic interpretations. This shift marked one of the most profound cognitive transitions in our evolutionary history. Instead of responding automatically to the world, humans started assigning meaning to patterns, gestures, and events. The development of symbolism allowed them to compress complex experiences into a single image, sound, or object. A handprint on a cave wall, a carved bone, or an arrangement of stones could represent ideas that were impossible to articulate through primitive language alone. These early symbols did not function as a full system yet, but they revealed a growing capacity to transform raw perception into structured meaning. As symbolic thinking took hold, humans began formulating early worldviews. These were not coherent mythologies, but rather interconnected interpretations that gave continuity to their experiences. A thunderstorm was no longer perceived in isolation. It was linked to memories of past storms, emotional responses, and imagined intentions behind the event. This continuity allowed humans to build causal narratives, even when the causes were invisible. The mind no longer accepted randomness as a default explanation. Instead, it searched for patterns that made sense within an emerging internal framework. This framework became the foundation for spiritual belief. Symbolism also changed how humans related to themselves. Once they could represent experiences mentally, they could reflect on their own emotions, motivations, and memories. This introspective capacity strengthened their sense of identity and deepened their awareness of being part of something greater than their immediate surroundings. It encouraged questions about origin, purpose, and destiny. These internal dialogues laid the groundwork for spiritual thought that would eventually evolve into ritual, a mythology, and organized religion. With symbolism came the ability to share meaning more effectively. Even with limited language, symbols acted as bridges between individuals, transmitting ideas that words alone could not convey. A mark on a wall could communicate danger, reverence, or gratitude. A specific gesture could signal respect for the dead or acknowledgement of a powerful natural force. Over generations, these shared meanings became cultural memory. They stabilized interpretations of the world and created continuity between ancestors and descendants. This cultural memory allowed early humans to preserve and refine spiritual ideas across long periods. Beliefs were no longer restricted to single individuals. They became communal constructs that shaped behavior, identity, and social organization. Symbolic systems also strengthened group cohesion, giving communities a shared sense of origin and destiny. They provided explanations for suffering, hope for continuity after death, and a framework for understanding natural forces that remained beyond human control. As these symbolic systems matured, they reached a critical point where spirituality was no longer just a personal intuition or fragmented interpretation. It was becoming a central part of human identity, influencing how communities made decisions, created rituals, and interacted with their environment. This evolution set the stage for the emergence of fully formed belief systems that would soon weave together emotion, memory, identity, and imagination into a unified spiritual worldview. As symbolic systems took root in prehistoric societies, the final step in this long evolutionary journey began to unfold, the moment when spirituality became inseparable from human identity. What started as instinct, fear, and scattered interpretations gradually transformed into a stable framework that shaped the daily lives of early communities. Humans no longer saw themselves as isolated beings reacting to a hostile world. They saw themselves as participants in a larger, interconnected structure governed by invisible forces, rhythms, and meanings. This awareness did not appear suddenly. It emerged through countless generations observing the cycles of nature, coping with loss, and sharing narratives that offered continuity in the face of uncertainty. As these beliefs became more integrated, they influenced decisions about where to live, how to organize social roles, and how to respond to challenges. Some groups may have believed certain landscapes carried protective qualities, guiding their migrations. Others may have attributed the success of a hunt or the survival of a child to unseen influences, reinforcing rituals that honored those perceived forces. Spirituality became practical as well as emotional, shaping strategies for survival and unity. By giving meaning to their struggles and triumphs, early humans crafted a worldview that made existence feel ordered rather than chaotic. This worldview also encouraged deeper forms of communication. Language evolved not only to describe physical objects, but to express abstract concepts like hope, fear, or destiny. As these ideas spread, communities developed shared symbols, chants, and rituals that reinforced group identity. Every gesture, word, or gathering strengthened the sense that life was part of a larger narrative, unfolding beyond human understanding. This narrative gave purpose to daily actions and established moral expectations long before formal religion existed. Spirituality became a silent architect guiding social norms, emotional resilience, and collective decision-making. Over time, these interconnected beliefs formed the earliest foundations of what would become mythology and organized religion. They shaped how humans perceive themselves in relation to the universe, giving structure to questions that had no logical answers. And although these prehistoric spiritual frameworks were simple compared to later traditions, they carried the essence of what still drives human belief today: the search for meaning, the need for connection, and the desire to understand what lies beyond the visible. If you reach this point of the journey, I would like to know you are here with me. Leave a comment with the phrase, "I am here until the end," so I know this exploration resonated with you. And if this content brought clarity or sparked curiosity, consider subscribing to the channel so you can continue diving into the origins of human belief with me. Your support helps expand this space for deeper understanding. If you feel that this perspective added something valuable to your day, a simple like helps more people discover the story of our shared past. And before you go, there is another video waiting that expands on this same theme. There is a continuation right beside this one, So click and come with me as we follow the next thread of humanity's search for meaning.